This morning, what I wanted to do was to just give you a little bit of an overview with regard to bees and gardening. I've tried to put together a little talk that is about a lot of different topics that kind of relate to both gardening and beekeeping. What I'd like to do is to plant some seeds today and see if there are some things that come out of our discussion this morning that might lead to a more specific talk that I could give to you later on in the next year or two, where I might come back and do something more specific. This is the geographic area that I have defined that we cover with our service. So we start here in Yonkers, we go up to Cold Springs, we cut across 301 to 84. From 84 we cut across to Danbury, we go down Route 7 to Norwalk, and then back down to New Rochelle. If you look at this, Bedford is basically right in the middle of this geographic area. So our mission, my mission, is to care for the honeybee population in this area. The reason that we've chopped up, added this piece of Connecticut is because when you look at Westchester geography, there's this big chunk of it that gets cut out here. This way, it's about a 30-minute loop from Bedford in any direction when we start here. We're working to help improve the bees in that area, and I'm going to tell you about that in a few more minutes, what we're doing with regard to that. All right, enough of that introduction. Let's talk about bees. So, what is it that makes a bee within the world of insects? Anybody got a guess as to what it is that makes a bee a bee? What do you think? Proboscis, wow, that's a pretty big word. This is a garden club that knows what it's talking about over here. The proboscis is the tongue-like mechanism of an insect that helps it to wick up nectar. Other insects have proboscises that are not bees. Nice try, though. Really nice try.
The way they process the nectar they take in?
No. Good try, though. Anybody else?
It's a social insect?
Termites are social insects. Does that make them bees? Well, but we're saying there's a defining quality that says this is what makes a bee a bee.
Fuzzy, striky and fuzzy.
Well, skunks are fuzzy. Does that make them bees? Nice try again. Anybody else? Pollinators. All right, there are certain moths that are pollinators. The hummingbirds are pollinators. So there are other animals that are pollinators that are not bees. A lot of bees are pollinators, but that's not the defining thing that makes a bee a bee.
They have a woman in charge.
A woman in charge! Wow! I think there are African tribal nations with women in charge, so nice try again. Here's what I'm looking for. The answer that I'm looking for is this. Any insect that uses pollen and nectar as its food source is considered a bee. All right? So there are about 20,000 insects around the world that live on just pollen and nectar from flowers, okay? Here in New York, we have about 400 different kinds of bees. For a bee to be considered a bee, it gets its protein from pollen. It gets its carbohydrates from nectar, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? So if you live on pollen and nectar, you're a bee, okay? Does that make sense? Now, what do the bees use the pollen for? What is that protein used for? The pollen is a source of protein. What are they using that protein for?
For the honeycomb? No. Energy to go out.
Well, energy is carbohydrates. So think energy is that's what we're going to use the pollen and the nectar for. The protein is the building block of the baby, the next generation of bees. So when a bee goes out and forages pollen, it's getting protein to build the body of their baby bees. Does that make sense?
You mean it's what they feed them?
That's what they're using for, well, they're feeding them, yes. Yes, that's correct. in the case of honeybees and other bees, you'll see in a minute. I'll show you in a minute how it works. Pollen is the building block of the protein for the bees' next generation. The nectar is full of carbohydrates. That's where they're getting energy. Energy to fly, energy for movement. In the case of honeybees, energy to create warmth and heat to stay active during the winter. Okay? This is a bunch of different pollens. I just brought that up to show you that in the realm of bees, and these are all different plants, so if you're watching the video on this, you can see the names of different plants and the sources of nectar. This is a great list of plants and but pollens come in a variety of shades of color. Just an interesting thing. Here are some of the bees that we have in our area. I'm going to talk about honeybees in a minute because that's what I specialize in, but I want you as gardeners, because a lot of you are interested in pollinator pathways and interested in native pollinators. These are some of our other bees that we have here in Westchester County that you should be aware of. This is a bunch of the different bumblebees. There are about 50 different kinds of bumblebees that exist. Bumblebees make a nest down in the ground like this. Very oftentimes they will make a nest in a burrow that a rodent has made the previous winter. The way bumblebees work is in the fall, right now, a nest of bumblebees has raised baby queen bumbles. They will fly out of these nests and bury themselves down in the leaf litter right now as the leaves are falling down. Those mother queen bumblebees lay dormant all winter. Next spring, when it warms up, they will emerge and find one of these burrows or find a hole or a nesting site and build a brand new nest every year. They do not overwinter from one season to the next, and they don't use that nest from one year to the next. They make a new nest every year. Honeybees, on the other hand, stay in a nest continuously from one year to the next to the next.
Honey, that is hanging off a tree.
What's that?
It's still in the ground. They make it near
Bumblebees make their nest down in the ground. Now I'm going to talk to you about something hanging off the trees in just a minute. These are sweat bees. These are little ground nesting bees. You may have seen these if you're out in your gardens. There are a lot of different bees that you will see out in the environment. Sweat bees are often green and iridescent like this, and they are ground nesters. So they burrow little holes down in the ground, and they will lay their eggs, and their young larvae will develop down in the ground. They are seasonal in that they lay their egg, it develops into a larva or pupa that will lay dormant until the next year. So they will come out for about a 6-week period. Each one has its different period that it emerges during the summer, and now you won't see them again until the following year because they're just dormant until then. Does that make sense? Okay. Here's a very common one. You all know these? Carpenter bees. Everybody knows the carpenter bee, right? Carpenter bees burrow a perfectly round hole in wood. They make this little channel or tunnel in that wood, and then they will provision that with some with some pollen, lay an egg on it, that will hatch, consumes the pollen as the larva. There's a series of these, so she'll get some pollen, lay an egg, wall it off. Get more pollen, lay an egg, wall it off. So there's a whole series of these developing in that chase in the burrow that they've carved out of the wood.
in this particular wood or just tree log?
No.
Any wood?
No, sheds.
It can be any wood. There, you will find a lot of, what?
Your porch?
Well, commercial wood that we use to build houses with, they often will actually do this in telephone poles. The utility companies have a lot of problems with, they actually have workers who have fallen off of poles because of what these bees flying around them. But in nature, they will do this just in logs or pieces of wood off of trees as well. So, but it's a very common bee that we have in our area, yes.
They don't, I mean, I have them at my house. They don't sting or they do sting?
Well, they can. The carpenter bees are very docile. The male bee, which is the one that protects the nest, that's the one that's going to be dive bombing you, is the one that they don't have stingers at all. The female has a stinger, but you would have to catch her and squeeze her to get her to sting you. They're very safe, very, very safe. Now, towards your house and chewing up your house, that's a whole nother story. I'm not going to comment on that one. This is the mason bee. Maybe some of you are aware of this. Mason bees are the bees that we use these bee boxes for. They will make their nests similar to that, but they use hollow twigs that they will lay, and once again, they will provision this with some pollen, lay an egg, wall it off, provision it with some pollen, lay another egg. So there will be a series of these young bees that will develop inside of those little tubules. Those will lay dormant then until the next season when they emerge. These emerge very early in the spring. You will often see these in early April. These are awesome pollinators, by the way, for fruit orchards if you have apple trees at your home. These are the bee hotels that oftentimes are used for these kinds of solitary bees that we have in the area. Ground nesting bees are another bee. In the spring, how many of you guys have noticed these little anthill holes out in your yard? Those are ground nesting bees. They are awesome bees. Encourage them. They are also, once again, though, there's about 10 different kinds of them that emerge at different times throughout the growing season. And very oftentimes, those bees will emerge at the very same time that a specific plant is blooming. So there are these symbiotic relationships between a particular bee and a plant that will pollinate it. Those ground nesting bees, you would have to catch them to try to get it to sting you. So first of all, they're very safe. Now, I know that the uneducated person is going to be scared of them because you make this association, and here's what you're associating it with. This is our demon. This is the insect that stings 95% of the people in the course of a growing season. They can sense where the soil is the right consistency for them to be able to make their burrows. So you'll only find them in areas where they have kind of sandy, crumbly soil that they can excavate, and that they seal the inside of that channel with kind of a waxy material that keeps it from collapsing in on itself. If it's too much clay in the soil and they can't do that, they won't make their nests in those areas. So you'll see them, when you see those patches of holes like that, they'll be like in an area that's sort of like this, and then over here there won't be any. And that's because the soil conditions are not conducive to making colonies of nests in that site.
So generally, you won't normally see them in a grass, on a lawn, you'll see them.
Well, it depends on the lawn. If your lawn is very fibrous and very lush, they won't be able to get through the turf. But if you have kind of a sparse lawn and there's kind of a gravelly, sandy soil under that, that will be conducive to them making colonies of these nests. Yes. And they're awesome pollinators. As far as pollinating flowers and that sort of thing, they really are actually better than honeybees. Yeah.
And did they pollinate the yellowtail?
All right. So the big question now that I have for you is this a bee?
No.
Why?
It stings.
Oh, who said it stings? Honeybees can sting, so they're still a bee. So why is that not a bee? What? Bees have, well, this has nothing to do with their wings. Another
Carnivore.
Thank you. What did we say makes a bee a bee? Pollen and nectar. What is this used for food? All right. Well, normally what does this use for food? These eat other insects. So yellow jackets feed on aphids, mealybugs, spider mites, small spiders. So yeah, good, right? They have a place in the environment. So we can't be too down on yellow. I know, such an ironic thing, right? But they do help to keep the mealybugs and the spider mites from overwhelming us. So be grateful that we have yellow jackets, or your gardens would be overrun with aphids, because they are consuming a lot of them. But this is the big difference between the wasps and the hornets. They do not collect pollen at all from the flowers. They will visit flowers for nectar, but they are not getting any of the protein to make the bodies of their next generation. This is the big difference between bees and wasps. I deputize all of you to next summer be my ambassadors to educate the general public. We had a meeting, the beekeeper said these are not bees. Tell everybody that they are wasps and correct them because there is a very big difference, all right? Paper wasps are another common wasp that we have. Here's one that some of you may know, the mud daubers. Mud daubers make this mud-like nest. Their abdomen has a very long, slender attachment to the thorax. Here's another common wasp that we have. Anybody know cicada killers? These are very, what?
I was just saying, yeah, there was one in my driveway. I was shocked. It was dragging its cicada.
Cicada killers are a really big wasp that a lot of people know in our area. They make a burrow down in the ground. They will sting a cicada. It does not kill it, it just paralyzes it. They will drag that cicada, which is a wonder of nature. That thing looks bigger than the wasp itself, but they're able to get it down in the burrow. They will lay eggs on this. The eggs hatch and consume the cicada to get the protein that they need to make the next baby wasp. But you see what the food source is? It's not pollen, it's another insect. Do you understand the difference here? These, once again, are very safe. They're big and they're scary looking and they don't fly very well and they usually fly very low to the ground. So most people are like intimidated by them. But you would have a hard time getting one to sting you. They're that safe. So just impress your neighbors with how courageous you are and go out and be around them. All right? Here is another very common one. Remember you said the ones hanging from the trees? These are what you're going to see hanging from the trees, bald-faced hornets. All right? Everybody got that? Now, here are three other hornets. Hornets are simply big wasps. That's the only difference between a hornet and a wasp. We just call the wasps that are pretty big hornets. They're still wasps. But these three, anybody recognize this? This is the murder hornet. Remember a couple years ago out in Washington State? There was this wasp, the hornet that was imported from Asia, that was the big threat to the honeybee population. This is the murder hornet. It's since been renamed the Asian hornet. This is a European hornet. We do have these in our area. And this is the yellow-legged hornet, which has just come into the United States. They saw them in Georgia for the first time. Both of these two can decimate a honeybee colony in a few hours. This one will eat honeybees, but not very many. So we can tolerate the European hornet. These two, if they get into the United States, will kill the honeybee and beekeeping industry.
So travel in on wood or on plants.
Container ships. Very oftentimes, container ships, when there's like a shipping container, these wasps will be in them from Asia, and they get brought across on a shipping container. The USDA maintains catch sites all around the ports of our country to help try to catch these foreign invading insects around the ports. Yeah. These insects are like bumblebees, and so is a yellow jacket. How do they work in their reproductive cycle? They make mothers this time of year that bury themselves down in the leaf litter, and they will emerge next spring to start a brand new nest. Why do you not see any yellow jackets in March, April, May, June, or July? Because they're simply just building out their nests. It's only in August and September that those nests get really big, and now all of a sudden you got yellow jackets everywhere, right? The same thing happens with these. If we can get to the nest and destroy the nest before they make mothers for the next generation, we can wipe these hornets out so they don't carry into the next year. Here's a quick comparison of these different wasps that just so you can kind of get some idea size-wise. This is a yellow jacket. This is the size of a giant hornet. They are about this big. So they are quite large hornets. All right. I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time. Africanized honeybees are the killer bees. These are bees that came into the United States from Brazil, they're in Africa. They're a form of honeybee that we work with that was brought into South America back in the 50s. They've migrated into the United States. If you want to talk about that, I'm going to come back and talk to you another day about that because there's so many other things I want to talk about today. These are the things that we get from our honeybees. Now I'm going to shift from talking about bees in general. We're talking a little bit about our honeybees right now, okay? Honeybees provide us with a bunch of different things. Honeybees get pollen and nectar, right? The nectar, when a bee goes out, the proboscis right here is this tongue-like structure. They use that to wick up nectar, which they carry in a little honey pouch or honey stomach in their abdomen. When they get back to their colony, they regurgitate that nectar into one of these cells. It's dehydrated. It's like taking maple sap and dehydrating it down into maple syrup. Nectar has a lot of water in it. The bees have to take that water out and concentrate it down to 18% water or less before it's considered honey. When it's honey, the bees will put a cap over the cell. Why do bees make honey in the first place? What?
Their own food.
For their young.
For the queen.
Who said winter? There you go. That is the answer to that word. Most of the other bees lay in a dormant state during the winter. Honeybees do not. If you have a nest of honeybees, they will stay active all winter long. They maintain the internal temperature of the colony at about 85 degrees. That takes a lot of energy. Honey is packed full of energy, so they are basically storing up a power plant full of honey, of energy, to carry them through the winter months. That's what makes honeybees very unique in the bee world. And we are able to capitalize on that because we can take a portion of that honey for our purposes for consumption.
The bees actually made that comb.
This is wax honeycomb, yes. I can pass this around if you want. This is, you'll see that it's hexagonal. The bees use the honeycomb to lay their eggs, so they'll raise their young inside of each one of the cells, or they will store food inside of the cells to provision their colony, their nest for the year. All right. For the sake, honey is used for a lot of different things. We're going to run out of time, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Pollen, obviously, like I said, is used for the protein that the bees are going to be using to raise their young. In the course of our honeybees, the worker bee eats that honey, they digest it in their digestive tract, and they secrete from their heads, a gland in their heads, worker jelly. That is what the larva is eating as it grows to make the body of the next generation of bees.
That's royal jelly.
Well, royal jelly, here, we'll talk about royal jelly right here, is different. Because when the bees are raising a new baby queen bee, the secretion that they make has different hormones in it. And that secretion right here in the bottom of this cell is royal jelly. So if it's a worker bee that's growing, it's worker jelly. If it's a queen bee that's developing, it's being fed royal jelly. Royal jelly is sometimes harvested and used for cosmetics and a lot of other different uses. Yes. All right. A little bit about pollination. We want to just, because you're gardeners, I wanted to make sure everybody understands the importance of pollination. So does a bee get up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to go pollinating today? No. A bee gets up in the morning and says, I'm hungry, let's go get some pollen and some nectar and bring it back to feed our young. But while it's out visiting the flower, the pollen, and everybody understands, are you all gardeners? This is basics, right? You covered this before you got your membership. A flower, the way it's fertilized, has male and female parts. The pollen is the male part of a flower. The pollen must be transferred from the anther to the stigma and grow down to fertilize the ovaries that are on the inside. That's what pollination is. Cross-pollination is between two plants. So your flower number one on your plant here and down the row is another plant that has another plant. You're going to get your pollen to this flower down the row. That is cross-pollinating, right? Did you say that? Yeah? So, and that's because plants can't get up and walk around like humans can. A guy can go mate with a girl down the next block, right? Plants can't do that. They're relying on the bees to carry the male part to the female part between two different plants. That's cross-pollination. Pollination on a single flower is just that process of getting the pollen into. Does that make sense to everybody? Why cross-pollination and the bees are so important is because that allows the genetics to get mixed up between all of the different plants. That's why pollinator pathways are important. So now, why are these bees so important for pollinator pathways? This is we're gonna run out of time, but this is one lesson I want to take home with you. Why is it? Those little solitary bees. Do you have some?
They go a long way.
Oh, that was such a good try. It was such a good try. But the problem is they go such a short way. You had it backwards. Oh, I wish you.
What about bumblebees that go miles and miles?
Well, some bumblebees may go miles and miles, and our honeybees go miles and miles. But you remember all those little solitary bees, those little sweat bees? A lot of them will only forage in the range of about a football field. So you think of a Giants or go to a high school football game. If their nest is in the middle of the field, they're only going to forage on flowers that are in that particular area. So the concept behind the pollinator pathways is to have linking football fields so that the pollinators don't get isolated in little patches because they don't go long distances. They only go short distances. Does that help you all? Does that make sense to everybody? You all connecting on what I'm trying to get you to see there?
That's why you want the pathway. You're saying
The pathways allow for those little links of patches of flowers so that they're close enough in proximity so that if there's a nest here on the corner, that little bee can make it over to another patch in the pathway down the neighborhood and get cross-pollinating going on between the plants of those. That's why pollinator pathways become very important to the environment. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I could talk for 2 or 3 days.
Back again.
I'll come back again. All right. Now, since we're on the topic of pollination, and here's something that's for you for honeybees and beekeeping. Does anybody recognize what these are? These are almond orchards. All right? Almond orchards. So within the realm of honeybees, honeybees are used by the beekeeping industry to pollinate almonds. Every year in the United States, more than half of all of the honeybees in America are transported by semi-trucks out to the San Joaquin Valley of California, where 90% of the almonds are grown, and they're put in the almond orchards because this row of almond trees will not set the seeds of almonds unless they get pollen from this row of almonds, of flowers. It will not self-fertilize. So remember that flower that I showed you before, the anther and the stigma? It will not set a seed unless it gets pollen from another flower on another tree. Cross-pollinating. The almond industry has grown into such a big industry that it requires, and the only way this works is with honeybees, it requires all of these honeybees to be it is a $2 billion industry. For beekeepers like the big boys who do this for commercially, they make more money being hired by the almond growers to bring their bees in to pollinate their flowers than they do by all the honey that they produce in America. So this is a map. The commercial industry of bee commercial pollinating contracting is a giant industry in America. They move bees on semi-trucks from orange groves to peach groves to blueberry groves. They pick the whole box up on a pallet. They have forklifts. They just drive them up and they lift eight honeybee boxes and they just ruck them right up on the truck. They go out and they go get another pile You know, that's how they do it. But there's this assumption that honeybees are competing with the natives to the point where they're causing damage to the natives. And you have to ask yourself, what is the basis of that assumption? And it would be that there's not enough pollen for everybody to have something to eat, right? I mean, isn't that what you're basically saying?
That's part of it.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. We're all bees, all right? This half of the room is honeybees, and all of you guys are little individual native bees, and we love you. We love you too. We're all gonna get up in the morning, and we're gonna go out there into the environment, and we're gonna be looking for pollen, right, on the flowers. Now, how much pollen do you need to feed your little baby? Remember those solitary wasps that I had? I showed you those little bits of pollen in the bottom of their nest, right? Are you with me? How much pollen do you need for your family?
A lot. You gotta work all day.
No, you hardly need anything. I mean, you remember, it's grams of pollen that these little bees, those ground nesting bees, the amount of pollen that they need to feed their young is measured in grams. Honeybees, on the other hand, and I will grant you this, use about 75 pounds of pollen over the course of an entire summer. Now, yeah, right? Who'd have thought? That's a lot of pollen when you add it all up. But go out in the environment and suck up all the pollen. Anybody who has allergies will tell you this, that there is an abundance of poundage of pollen in the environment, right? I mean, when you go out and if you were to hoover up every drop of pollen off of every tree and flower, there would literally be tons, thousands of pounds within an area that the bees are foraging in, right? So my contention would be, first of all, that the assumption that honeybees are causing the native bees to be damaged or hurting in some way is not based on the fact that they're honeybees, but there are other things in the environment that are causing all insects in general to be in decline. And honeybees are maybe getting a bit of a bad rap because they're not native. Just saying. I cannot find any data from any scientist that really, true science, you cannot, how are they measuring this impact that the honeybees are having? When you go out and you just think common sense wise in the environment, how much pollen is out there for everybody to share, and the amount when you measure up that they each one need, there is an abundance of pollen in the environment. Now, timing may be an issue. There are certain times of the summer when we get a drought, when nothing's blooming, that there can be competition then. But in a year when there's normal rainfall, there should be more than adequate pollen for all of the native pollinators to get a good amount and all of the honeybees, unless the honeybees are oversaturated. If you're putting 100 colonies in an area, granted, that would be competition that would be unfair. To answer your question, varietal honeys come from large acreages of one kind of plant. So, what is the biggest state in America for honey production? Who can guess what state in America produces more honey than any other state?
Kansas,
Nope.
Maine.
Nope.
Florida,
Nope.
Kansas.
Nope.
California,
Nope.
Oklahoma.
North Dakota. I was just going to ask you that. What do they grow in North Dakota that they can produce so much honey from? Anybody know?
Corn.
Huh? Not corn.
Soybeans.
Nope. Nope.
Cactus.
Nope. Ah, you got it. You got it. Where does that come from?
Canola.
Well, yeah, what plant does that come from?
Rapeseed.
Rapeseed. Anybody know rapeseed? Rapeseed is the plant that is produced, that canola oil comes from. What is canola? Canola is a made-up word. It's Canadian oil, Oh, I should remember. It's a made-up word. The canola oil industry came out of the Second World War. Canola was originally, that oil was used to lubricate machinery. And it was hard to digest, but they were able to modify canola rapeseed plants so that it could be easily digested. Rapeseed is the plant. It's in the mustard family. Anything in the brassica, everybody guys, you know, broccolis and mustard greens, all those great things that have those big, beautiful blooms of yellow flowers are awesome, awesome plants for bees. Rapeseed is in that family, and they produce this beautiful head of yellow flowers, and those seeds are crushed to produce canola oil. But nobody wants to buy rapeseed oil. It's just got this name that just doesn't work. So that's where the canola oil industry came from. Now, who is the biggest consumer of all that honey from North Dakota?
McDonald's.
McDonald's? Oh, come on, Ed. Try again. You can do better than that. Who's using all... I bet you had some this morning. Who uses more honey than anybody in America? Ah, you're in the ballpark. Wrong company. Who makes Cheerios? General Mills. Honey Nut Cheerios uses semi-tanker loads of honey in the production of Cheerios, and a lot of that honey comes out of North Dakota. To answer your question, varietal honeys are from areas where there's just one kind of plant that the nectar is harvested from. So buckwheat is grown out in the Midwest. Clover, if you have clover honey, comes from a lot of it comes from Nebraska and those areas out in the Midwest where they have big fields of clover. Orange blossom honey is a common one from Florida. Tupelo honey comes from the Appalachian Mountains.
So what's yours?
Aha. So here in Westchester, we do not have enough of one kind of flower that blooms at one time that we can have a true varietal honey. So if anybody's selling you buckwheat honey and they're selling it that it came from Westchester, it's not happening. It's not true. Any varietal honey, orange blossom, came from out of state. So I brought some honey for you all to try. It's sitting on the back table. I brought some if you want to buy some to take some home. This is our local honey that we produce. And this is a wildflower honey. Predominant plants in this are black locust trees. Y'all know black locust when it blooms in the spring around Memorial Day? Oh my gosh, it's such a great plant for the bees. We get some linden, basswood honey, linden trees blooming in June. We get a lot of honey from that. The yellow clover along the highways. We get nectar from Japanese knotweed. Y'all, that demonish plant, you know, I know, but it does produce a lot of good nectar for our bees. And here's another one I was going to tell you, but I know we're running out of time. But one of the other ones, get this. Let's just show you real quick. Here's one more. Oh, where did I put it? Wait a minute. I thought I had it in here. There it is, right there. What is this? For the entomologist, this is spotted lanternfly. You've all probably been talking about this all year, right? But look at what spotted lanternflies produce on there when they're feeding on a plant. These drippings, this is sap, and it's also excrement from the spotted lanternfly. The bees will collect this as honeydew. They can take that nectar, they can take the sap and the fecal material from the spotted lanternfly and turn it into honey. It's a dark red honey. It's who would have thought, right? But it is a source of nectar. And out in Pennsylvania, they've actually been able to do a varietal spotted lanternfly honey. Believe it or not. Yeah, so for what it's worth. Anyway, in our honey here, we have to call this wildflower honey because it is a mixture of different kinds of honey. This is a liquid version. I did do some creamed honey. This has been crystallized it's been seeded with very small crystals. This honey is very good for spreading. This honey is very good for putting in tea and that sort of thing.